Shalom and welcome. I don't have the words to say how special it is to see everyone gathered here once again in person. On behalf of all members of the Victoria Shoah Project, I thank you for taking the time on a beautiful Sunday afternoon to share with us in this commemoration as we honor and remember those we knew and those we didn't know, survivors who managed to live through the horrors of the Shoah, and the seemingly endless numbers of those who were degraded, dehumanized, and whose lives were smothered and brutally cut off in the destruction. I'd like to acknowledge that our beloved cemetery is located on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees nations. We respect their connection to this land. In keeping with our chosen theme for this year's program, we'll be sharing, through words and songs, some personal stories and moments of remembrance and repair. I'd like to begin with one such story that is connected to Gidi Nachshon, may his memory be for a blessing, who was a founding member of the Victoria Shoah Project and whose inspiring presence is still felt whenever we are planning these commemoration events. Gidi's father's family came from the town of Bardiov, located in eastern Slovakia. And his father was the only one of a very large family to survive the Shoah. In 2012, and again in 2014, Gidi and his wife Laurel, may their memories be for a blessing, his sister Anna and I traveled to Bardiov to gather with survivors, descendants, and friends to see what was then the beginning of the restoration of the Jewish area of Bardiov, thanks to Emil Fish, a local survivor, and to Petr and Pavel Hudak, a local father and son team, who were and still are instrumental in uncovering and bringing back to light the history of the Jewish community in Bardiov. The group of descendants and friends from these events has stayed in touch over the years through email. And although time and distance inevitably have slowed the amount of communication, periodically an email arrives from someone with an update on their lives or something connected to the Jewish community in Bardiov. I found one such message in my mailbox not too long ago. A descendant who lives in Israel shared a story which has come to light about a special Torah scroll from one of the shuls in Bardiov, the Bikur Cholim shul. When we were there in 2012, we davened in that shul, and it was the first time Jews had prayed there since the Shoah. It was an unforgettable and deeply moving experience. The following inspiring account only makes the experience more poignant. In the uncertain days of troubles and deportations, the members of the Bikur Cholim Kehila in Bardiov gathered in their shul, removed a Torah from the Aron Kodesh, and unraveled the stitches binding the sheets of parchment. Each man received one sheet for safekeeping, which he sewed into his clothing. The men agreed that they would meet to reunite the sheets after the war. Unfortunately, when those who survived were again able to gather, more than a few were missing. Those who did survive all had similar tales of how they had frequently read and found comfort in the words on their piece of Torah. While some of the surviving pieces returned in remarkably good condition, others bore witness to the difficult years and were scratched, stained with dirt, sweat, even blood. The men debated what to do with the remaining pieces. Rather than fixing the pieces they had and replacing the missing pieces to create a new Sefer Torah, they opted to sew together the pieces they had as an eternal memorial to those who had perished. This pasul, or flawed, perhaps scarred is a better word, Sefer Torah, eventually made its way to Israel, where it was adopted by a shul in Ramat Gan, where there were a few members from Bardiov. When that shul closed several years ago, the Torah found a new home in Givat Shmuel, where members continue to cherish this Sefer Torah, which to this day is taken out and danced with every year on Simchat Torah. Mirel, the Israeli woman who shared this remarkable account, has since connected with the shul in Givat Shmuel and witnessed seeing this inspiring scroll herself, along with an Israeli journalist who recalled his father, a survivor from Bardiov, telling him about this scroll. We live in complex and trying times, including having to witness the current horrors and atrocities occurring in Ukraine. All of us are feeling the pain and wondering how we can help. The account of the Bardiov Torah scroll perhaps reminds us that when the immensity of the challenges we face become overwhelming, the way we find a path through is by each taking a piece of something we can do to help, to remember, to repair. No gesture is too small. Perhaps we can sew into our daily lives one fragment of remembrance and repair. Find a cause that speaks to us. Sew onto our hearts the commitment to do a kind deed, to involve ourselves in an activity like coming together as we are today, to honor and remember. The Bardiov Torah scroll demonstrates how all of these fragments, when sewn together, become a powerful whole, a testament to honor those we have lost, and a statement of our collective strength and determination to never remain silent in the face of injustice and to never lose hope. As we move through our program this afternoon, we hope you will find meaningful moments that resonate for you. We'd like to start not with words, but with silence. On Yom HaShoah in Israel, at 11 a.m., a siren sounds. Traffic stops, activities come to a halt, and everyone holds these moments together in honor of all those who were murdered in the Shoah. Please join us now as we let our hearts speak together in silence for a moment or two.
Beautiful friends, I'm Isa Millman, and I have the honor of addressing you today as we remember the darkest chapter of Jewish history, still resonant 77 years after the end of World War II. Can everyone hear me okay? As a daughter of survivors, the Shoah was, and it continues to be, my inheritance. What I hold is my very precious legacy. It's my history, my family, my identity. From a very young age, I learned about the war and that it did not end for my parents and their surviving siblings in 1945. It was my destiny to carry and preserve our history from a DP camp in Germany, where I was born, to the United States, where I grew up, and to Canada, where I have lived for nearly 50 years. And finally, in my relative old age, I was ready to write my family story in the book that became Afterlight. I couldn't avoid facing the pain and the sorrow I knew I would encounter on the journey I had to take. My parents' Holocaust story didn't fit the usual narrative, and I wanted to bring their lesser-known story to light. They survived by deportation by the Soviets to slavery in the Siberian Gulag, in a so-called paradise, according to those very few Jews who survived the camps and ghettos and in hiding in Nazi-occupied Europe. So in the hierarchy of suffering, my parents could barely step foot on the lowest rung. And at the time, they were not considered real survivors. So a big part of my motivation to write my memoir was to tell this lesser-known story of my parents' survival and the other story of their families who were murdered in what is now called the Holocaust of bullets, which took place in eastern regions of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and other parts of the former Soviet Union. 1.5 million Jews were murdered there, mostly by being shot into pits, often with the help of local Poles and Ukrainians. Babin Yar is the most famous, where about 34,000 Jews were murdered in 3 days. These are precisely the places that are undergoing the cataclysm of terror and brutality that we have been watching in real time since February 24th, when Russia invaded Ukraine. So my challenge now is how to integrate the horrible past with this terrible present. I've been crying a lot since Putin began this brutal war, and there's no question about my support for Ukraine. But every day, my brain calls up Leonard Cohen's anthem, and especially these lines about the killers in high places who say their prayers aloud. but they've summoned up a thundercloud. They're going to hear from me. And I say, halavai, I'm shouting it, and it can't come soon enough. And I confess that I feel like I'm suffering from PTSD, watching scenes that are so eerily similar to what I came to know of my parents' experiences. But I can't be trapped in the past and equate it with what is happening now. I read a piece very recently that quoted Daniel Mendelsohn, who observed that we must allow ourselves to update deeply felt beliefs. He was not expecting to find himself a scholar and a writer of third generation whose family was murdered in Ukraine, to be rooting for the Ukrainians. And I too, when I began my journey in search for family history, did not expect to find any sympathy with Ukraine, given what I knew of what happened to my Jewish family there. I started with deeply held beliefs taught to me by my parents and the greater Jewish world I lived in. I believed that there was not one good thing that could be said about Poland and its people, and the same, if not more, for Ukraine. Yet I met wonderful, compassionate, brilliant, and loving people there, and some have become close and cherished friends. I recognize the danger in condemning every human just because they happen to belong to a collective, be it tribe, religion, or nation. Wasn't that precisely the insanity that leads ultimately to genocide? I learned that I could adjust my attitudes without betraying my family. I learned that I mustn't tar everyone with the same brush. I also learned about the tyranny of borders. I believe that my parents were Polish Jews and resented the elimination of their history because borders were redrawn. It was a challenge for me still, and it still is, to think of my mother as a Ukrainian Jew and my father as a Belarusian. The towns of their birth were only 60 kilometers apart, and they were located in Poland at the time. So as I explored, I tuned into the tyranny of history, of hatreds going back centuries, not only the universal hatred of Jews in these lands, but hatred between Poles and Ukrainians. I had no idea of the complexity of history in these places. So my journey to Eastern Europe was very much a learning journey. What I sought then, beyond the missing facts in history, and what I seek now and wish to share with you, is consolation. Let me introduce you to two people who mean the world to me. Some of you have already met them in my book. Oksana Zhubok is a teacher in Poliski, the Ukrainian village where my mother grew up. Oksana was instrumental to our experience, where the whole village welcomed us as long-lost family and renewed my faith in humanity. It was as important for them to meet us as it was for us to meet them. And with Oksana and the rest of the village, we had a true experience of tikkun, the Hebrew word for repair. And it was and it remains an unforgettable gift. And here's Kasia Kapszak, who was our guide and researcher in Warsaw and is now a close friend. When I couldn't reach Oksana by email when Putin ordered the invasion of Ukraine, it was Kasia, who did not know Oksana, but was able to write to her in Ukrainian and connect her to me. Kasia also offered her shelter should she choose to flee to Poland. Kasia was at the border immediately after the Russian invasion, bringing mothers and children to her small apartment in Warsaw, which she is still doing. Oksana chose to remain in Poliski. She and the entire village have remained in place and are working on defense as the war rages, while her husband and son are off fighting. When I wrote to her saying how much I wished I could help in a real, substantial way, how torturous it was to watch the horror and how helpless I felt, she wrote back saying that I should know how much my love and moral support helped her and the people in Poliski. So we write to each other often. Writing to Kasia at Pesach, expressing my grief over Ukraine, here's how she replied, and I quote, "Until Russia is defeated, we should focus on helping the refugees as we can. Helping keeps us busy and does not leave room for thinking too much about the things we cannot change. Also, it helps the Ukrainian soldiers to fight for their freedom when they know that their women and kids are safe. It's also important to feel festive and happy, even in difficult times. We should not let ourselves be taken by bad energy. It should not prevail in our world. This is why I take my refugees to restaurants and to the zoo and other distractions. The better we are treated and the better we treat ourselves in bad times, the better we live the trauma. Little actions can have a great power when done with love," Kasia continues. "Isa, please see what I'm doing today as a way to share the good I received in my life from people like you with those who currently need it. We are not powerless. Being good, sharing joy, and giving support to others can change the world. Chag Pesach Sameach. I'm sending you a lot of love and many, many hugs." Receiving this from Kasia is such a gift. And it echoes a line from Szymborska, the great Polish poet, that a friend recently sent to me. "Forgive me, distant wars, for bringing flowers home." It's hard to escape the guilt I feel for the blessed, peaceful, bountiful life that I live. And I think it's true for most of us, of the second and third generations after the Shoah. And I think it's true for all of us gathered here today. At the end of my journey, when writing the last chapters of my book, I tried to come to terms with the profound losses that I still can hardly articulate. More than anything, I was seeking consolation. I spent a lot of time listening to Yiddish songs sung by Chava Alberstein, and these songs brought my mother back to me. She was a beautiful singer of Yiddish songs. And one spring day, I had a glorious moment of epiphany in our Victoria garden. I was looking at the almond tree ablaze in pink blooms, the tree that we had planted in my mother's memory. And I suddenly understood that for all that is lost and cannot be recovered, what remains is love. And by love, we carry on. And here we are gathered together on a very similar spring day, seeking consolation during a bitter, tragic war that's being fought in a distant land. So let us be moved by this beautiful Yiddish song that will be sung by Nechama Firstman. It's a song that seeks comfort after tragedy, finding solace in the beauty of trees while knowing that one can never be fully comforted after what's happened.
Zu ihm der Knie, ich hab sich kein, ich hab sich kein. Ich sitz unter a Feigenbäum, a Feigenbäum. Arum is green, arum is grün, sie ist green und grün. Ich lieg unter a Mandelbäum, a Mandelbäum. Ist gewinn bei mir in Träum, bei mir in Träum. Ich lieg unter a Mandelbäum, a Mandelbäum. Ist gewinn bei mir in Träum, bei mir in Träum. A Boxerbaum, a Mandelbaum, a Mandelbaum, a Boxerbaum, a Feigenbaum, a Mandelbaum in Eugatrell. Altan
I'd like to start out by thanking the Victoria Shoah Project for making sure this event happens and for collaborating with Bima Productions on the play, the educational play that I'm going to tell you about. Without them, I'm not sure this project would have happened. And a special thank you to Helga, Fran, Peter, and Misha. Thank you. I'm also very grateful to have been given the rights to this eye-opening play for all of BC. It enables me to continue my lifelong work of fighting and addressing anti-Semitism. 12 years ago or so, Holocaust education was removed from the curriculum of our schools, and a lot of learning about that important period in our history mostly fell through the cracks. We now have a generation of students who many have had little or no formal education about the Holocaust. And as we all know, sadly, anti-Semitism is on the rise. Survivors, the play, fills that educational gap. And it empowers the participants and the audiences to take a stand against racial intolerance. It explores hatred and the capacity to survive and to thrive. The audiences are uplifted by the survivors' triumphs. The play is inspired by the lives and recorded testimonies of 10 real Holocaust survivors in the Rochester, New York area. It tells the chronological history of the Holocaust. The young actors guide the audience through a time when hatred was normalized. The play covers the rise of Hitler through to the end of the war, and it includes true stories, such as a teen watching her boyfriend being taken away to a concentration camp, and a young girl in tears being dragged away from her parents as she was relocated to England through the Kinder transport. Though each of them has a unique story, all the survivors went through this horror, and they came through the other side to build meaningful and contributing lives. The playwright, Wendy Cout, says, "We're telling history as a cautionary tale for the present and for the future." Survivors has been endorsed by 2 ministers of education. Thank you, Minister Fleming, and by the current Minister of Education. And this fall, after a 2.5-year wait forced by COVID, we will finally be doing the tour, the pilot tour to middle and secondary schools here on the island. We are hopeful that after the play is assessed, that it will be allowed to be in the curriculum path in the schools. You will have an opportunity, by the way, to see this play. Bima Productions is going to do a few performances of it in our Black Box Theater in early December. I now have the pleasure of introducing 2 young actors who are going to read a scene for you from the play. The play is made up of both storytelling and of reenactment. And the scenes of reenactment are taken verbatim from the Holocaust survivors' testimonies. They're very moving. So it's my pleasure to introduce Sarah Michelle Lang, who is a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and Carter Gulseth, a recent graduate of our own University of Victoria. They will now join us to read a scene from the play.
Our only hope to survive was to separate and try and escape. So I leave my parents and flee to my best friend Christina's house, where they risked their own lives by hiding me overnight in a shed. The next day, Christina and her mother buy a train ticket for the new me. I board the train to Vienna with a Catholic prayer book from Christina's mother and that just-in-case suitcase she'd been saving for me. I don't know if I'll ever see any of them ever again. But I will fight my hardest to survive and keep my promise to Mama and Papa to speak of what happened to us and all the Jewish families.
We are all fighting our hardest to survive and hold on to hope, but every day, Hitler's empire grows and grows. By land, Germany invades Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Paris. And by air, the constant German bombing of London begins trying to force the English to surrender. The next year, more horror. Germany invades Russia, sending mobile killing squads.
1.3 million Soviet Jewish men, women, and children are murdered.
The same year, we Jews are required to wear a yellow Star of David patch on our outer clothing. Not wearing it means immediate arrest and deportation to a camp. The plan is to identify us.
And isolate us, because now we are forced to leave our homes and move into ghettos across the occupied countries. The ghettos vary in size, but most have run-down housing, unsanitary conditions, no medical supplies, and little food. Once the Nazis have us in one part of a city, it's easier for them to control us and starve us.
In Hungary, we are forced to leave our beautiful house, carrying one suitcase each, and move into a one-room apartment with no furniture, 3 other starving families, and 1 kitchen. Who needs a kitchen when there is no food? One night, I hear my parents saying that the ghetto is like a prison without a roof, that they can't continue like this. Mama says that we can sell the furniture, but Papa says soon it will be winter. We'll have to burn the furniture for heat. So Mama says that she'll sneak out of the ghetto and steal some potatoes, but Papa argues that us children can survive on little food, but we cannot survive without a mother. If she is caught, the Nazis will hang her on Main Street to show us that there is no way out of the ghetto. So, without telling my parents, I sneak out of the ghetto and I go to a potato farm that I know of, but the farmer catches me and they throw me in jail, and from my cell, I can see a wall in the prison yard where every 5 minutes they're shooting someone. Rabbi Herschel, and then Franz, a boy I know from school. I think that I'll be next, but then, and I don't know how, my mama gets me out of that jail, and I hug her, and I cry like a baby. I'm 9 years old, just trying to feed my family. Very different from the experience in Terezin in Czechoslovakia.
Ah, wonderful, carefree Terezin, where my family is sent. Looks like a summer camp to any visitor. But that model Jewish settlement is another Nazi lie. Because the Nazis created Terezin to fool the world into believing that we Jews are living safe and happy lives in the ghettos. And their propaganda works. When the Red Cross Committee comes for their one inspection, they see decent dormitories for men, women, and children. They see me singing in the choir, my brother Rolf playing soccer, and our mama teaching a children's painting class. The Red Cross sees what the Nazis wanted them to see. But right outside the perimeters of this lie is the truth. There is a large, brutally run Nazi transit camp with deplorable conditions and slave labor, sending Jews to even worse camps. My brother Rolf, along with thousands of others, is sent to one of these camps and dies there. There's a famous quote from Hitler: "Make the lie big, make it simple, Keep saying it, and eventually they'll believe it. The world believes the lies and thinks we Jews are safe, while the Nazis are systematically isolating and brutalizing us.
December 7th, 1941, a turning point. The Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. then enters the war, and with America now on our side, we have hope.
But the very next day in Poland, the Nazis begin deporting Jews to Chelmo, the very first extermination camp. And these families have no idea death awaits them.
And the next year, death awaits us all as the top Nazi officials begin formalizing plans for the final solution: to exterminate all the Jews of Europe. They have identified us, then isolated us, and now they are deporting us.
Day by day, we Jews in occupied Europe are forced out of the ghettos and into labor camps, death camps, and thousands of smaller camps. Most are transported by train and cattle cars with no water, food, toilets, or ventilation.
Many die en route to the camps, as so many are forced to take the terrifying 3-day journey to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Thank you.
The old man is gone, like a long forgotten song. His body black as coal, but he's still a living soul. The woman by his side couldn't find a place to hide. Just a memory, I'm told, wrapped up in her loving soul. Little children in the yard, fearful of the black cap guard. They were easy to control, all except their living soul. We are listening for it still, and can hear it if we will. Rabbi reading from the scroll, finding rhythms of the soul. We mourn the ones who've gone, no graves to dwell upon, just a prayer to sing belong, and we all fulfill our role, keeping safe
Rabbi Harry. And, you know, each year it always feels daunting looking out and seeing so many of our friends and family who were survivors, who held that first-person witness. How are we going to tell the story? How are we going to hold the memory? And how are we going to do it with integrity and dignity? And I've been finding today incredibly moving. And I feel like we're putting the memory into the hands of second and third generation. They might not have seen with their eyes, but they've seen with their hearts. And through their hearts, I think they're really reaching all of us. I know at the end of our program, there's a little nudge to go and visit some of the survivors who are finally resting here. You know, when I'm here and I look around, I think about some of them who survived because of outrageous chutzpah, some who survived from the love of friends, some who survived from a sense of generosity, some who just survived because that was their mazal, and some who survived because they willed to live their life as the antithesis of Nazism. And I just want to recommend that those of us who have friends or those who'd like a tour and to hear some of the stories of the people who are buried here, let me know. I'd be happy to tell some of the stories that I know later. Meanwhile, I'm going to say the El Malei Rachamim prayer. I'm going to chant it. It asks God to hold the souls of those who perished during the Shoah, and I would say those who survived the Shoah who are no longer on our planet, to hold their souls in safekeeping. So if you're comfortable and you can, please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Shochem b'marumim, Hamse menucha nechona, Tachat hashchina, B'malot kedoshim u'tochim, K'zorach ki הם מזהירים את נשמות 6 מיליון אחינו ואחיותינו שנהרגו על קידוש השם. בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותם. אדוני אתה הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבם ונאמר אמן. To our 6 million brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you, divine source, in the lofty heights of the sacred and the pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. You, God, source of mercy, forever hold them and enfold them in the embrace of your wings. Secure their souls in eternity. Adonai, they are yours. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen.
Yitgadal v'yitkadosh Shemei Rabbah Ve'alma divrach hirutei, V'yamlich malchutei, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבא מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens let peace descend on us and on all Israel, and we say amen.
Hey, please join me, I should say. Please, please, please. Eli, Eli, שלא ייגמר לעולם. החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם אלי אלי שלא ייגמר לעולם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת
In this commemoration with us. We are so grateful for your presence and your participation. And thank you to all of our presenters, our singers, our musicians, our actors who have helped to make this a wonderful renewal of our being able to have our event in person, and who have given so much kavod and honor to all of those survivors who are in our cemetery and all of those who we lost to the Shoah. I also would like to thank anyone who volunteered or set up chairs or audio, and everyone who helped to make it so special. And I invite you all to take up Rabbi Harry's words and encourage you to walk around this beautiful space. And thank you to Heather Mitchell, who has you'll see some flags with Stars of David at some of the graves, and this is to indicate that these are survivors or descendants of survivors. So please feel free to linger in this space. And thank you all again so much for coming today and sharing in this with us.
A few dark ones still.